Welcome to yet another edition of Election Adda. I'm Yamini Aiyar and I'm here with our in-house election guru Rahul Verma to discuss how we interpret the penultimate phase of the elections. This has been a long, treacherous and often toxic 2 months for India. We are now finally reaching the last lap of this long marathon. How do we interpret what has happened thus far? How do we interpret what is to happen in the next last two phases of polling, and what lies in store for us on May 23rd? Those are some of the key points that we discussed today. Let me first begin, Rahul, with talking to you about how to interpret the first 5 phases. Increasingly now, everyone seems to have come to the conclusion that this is not a wave election. Hawa nahi hai. Does that mean that 2014 is going to go back to 2009 or 2004, or are we entering, or are we misinterpreting the word Hawa itself? What does an election with a wave mean, and what does an election with no Hawa mean?
So thank you, Yamini. So I don't know what wave means. It seems like as if once the election results are out, and if the results are in favor of one particular party, we use the term wave, tsunami, juggernaut, all these terms from geography to describe election outcomes.
They make good headlines.
Yeah, but we don't know at what point we should call something as wave, right? Was 280, so if BJP got 282, was that wave? What if they would have got, say, 252 or 300? Was it still wave? Because if they were at 250 or 300, that's a difference of 550 seats. So in political science, we don't use these terms. In fact, recently Pranoy Roy and the Raj Sarpariwala came out with a book where they use this term landslides. So they have a clear-cut definition of landslide, where party number 1 or the winner party gets at least twice the seat as the losing party. So there is a clear empirical definition behind when do you call a landslide election. In political science, we basically try to understand an election by using 2 terms. One is a critical election and the second one is a normal election. Now, it's hard for someone to make a claim, basically you can't prejudge a critical election. Critical elections, once the results are out and you see that this election is going to have a historic impact on the nature of politics in future, that becomes a critical election. So even if you look at all elections from 1952 till now, we know there were some elections which were more important for the country than others. For example, the first election of 1952, the 67 election, perhaps the election in 1989, and then in 2014. Because all these elections produced a very different set of competitive space in Indian politics. Now, many of us think that 2014 was a critical election which realigned the party system, where BJP emerged as one of the dominant forces of politics. And all the competition and realignment or alignment is happening either in favor or against the BJP. Now, 2019 to me seems like a very normal election. Normal in the sense, not how the campaign is being you rightly said this is a long campaign and toxic campaign, but critical elections have very different element in comparison to normal election. So in this election, so in 2014 we saw at least a 7 to 9% jump in turnout. In 2019 the changes in turnout is not going to be more than 2 percentage points. You don't have a new leader on the national scene. There are no new talking points to mobilize voters. There is the surveys which were conducted just before the first phase, the pre-polls, most of them suggested there was no rage against the government. So there is sort of discontent against the government. People are unhappy with their economic situation. They do sort of put the blame on the government for not being able to fulfill those aspirations. But there is no visible anger which was there in 2014 against the government. So in that sense, because most of the parameters of the election are sort of normal in that sense, what we might see is a continuation of competitive space which was created in the wake of 2014, which does not mean that BJP is going to win the same number of seats, or BJP is certainly going to win the election. But the parameters of the rules of the game that was set then will be continued in this election.
So what are the implications of that? What are the implications of that for the reorganization of party structures? What are the implications of that for regional parties? Most importantly, what are the implications of that for Congress and how Congress is structured in a time?
Okay, so let's in 2014, so since 2014 till 2019, if we think that a BJP-led dominant party system is being established, which means that BJP may lose certain elections, but BJP is going to be the focal point of competitive space. It is going to affect Congress, regional parties, and BJP itself. So now what is happening, at least for the Congress, that BJP becomes the dominant national party, a position which was earlier enjoyed by the Congress party. Now Congress will ideologically have to establish itself in opposition to the BJP, right? And the space of the Congress is shrinking in that sense. So even if Congress manages to sort of improve its position from 2014 in terms of vote share and seat share, Congress is going to go down in 3 states. Congress is going to lose its oppositional space in Odisha. It is going to lose its oppositional space in Bengal. It is also going to lose its space in Tripura, which it lost in the assembly election. Right? So even if Congress makes certain gains, say in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, where it was already a competitive party, it is not gaining any new ground. Rather, it is more likely to lose 3 states in 2019. Now, if we come to regional parties, so Congress in some ways will become a regional party of North India, right? Regional parties, on the other hand, there would be a reorganization of that politics. So, for example, let's take Odisha. Now, if BJP becomes the principal opposition party of Biju Janata Dal in Odisha, Congress is no longer an important player in that state. The space is going to be reorganized. Similarly, we know that Congress doesn't have now electoral space in Andhra Pradesh. It is certainly now after aligning with JDS, what Congress and JDS have done in Karnataka have given entry to BJP in the southern Karnataka region. So in Mysore, Karnataka, so far the contest was only between Congress and JDS. These 2 parties would get 70 to 80% of vote share. After this alignment, what they have done, they have allowed BJP's entry. So they are not going to get 80% of vote share as a joint candidate, but they will get somewhere, say in some seats 40-45, some seats 50-55. But now BJP will suddenly become a party of 40 to 50% on those seats in southern Karnataka. Now, I'm not at all saying that this position of BJP in South Karnataka cannot be reversed. If you are a very, very organized and smart party, you have groundwork on, you can do this. But given we know way the Congress party is organized, and especially in some ways is also not very sure of its strategies. On day 1 it does something, on day 2 it does something else. So in that sense they will see the space there. So what is happening that some of these regional parties, say TMC, BJD, DRS, and Jagan Mohan's party or Chandrababu Naidu's party or DMK, these parties will continue to have their relevance and importance. In these states, I think BJP will still find to sort of have a sweeping claim. But for example, say take the left parties. In 2004, they had the largest chunk of MPs after Congress and BJP. Now it seems that they are going to go down in Bengal, they are already down in Tripura. It might be the first time in the history that the left front does not have even 6 to 8 MPs in the parliament.
Yeah.
So in that sense, Congress space would be sort of regional parties are also going to be, they have to think of reorganizing or realigning themselves to take advantage of the emerging competitive space in their own states. Similarly, in states like Bihar and UP, because the 2 large regional parties have sort of UP have aligned themselves together. Now, it is possible that one of them after this election goes further down and then the space would be reorganized there. In Bihar, it seems that RJD would occupy the principal oppositional space, where JDU, despite getting the similar share of seats, has now become more dependent on BJP compared to what it was in pre-2014.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's for the regional parties. BJP itself will have to rethink its strategies going forward, because when you become a dominant party, everyone wants to be closer to you, wants to be part of the space which you are occupying. So there will be lots of forces that will try to join the party or will feel suffocated and leave the party. So how do you manage these emerging coalitions? Right? If you become a dominant player, you are going to sort of suffocate certain smaller regional parties and become so those things also need to.
But isn't it a fair argument to make that even as we are headed into a new BJP dominant party system for India, regional parties, if you look back to 2017, between 2014 and 2017, actually I would say even all the way till December of 2017, when the Gujarat elections sort of started changing the dynamic a little bit, it did look for a while that in fact this new dominant party system was one where regional parties almost had no role, as the BJP was beginning to sort of build, of course, in northern India and to some degree in eastern India. Southern India was a slightly different story there. And over the last 2 years, that narrative has changed. I mean, look at the UP story, right? Suddenly, the BJP, from being in a very strong position, 2 years is a lifetime in politics, but in the life cycle of a nation, it's a relatively short period of time to see such a sudden twist, where you saw a party that had dominated in the assembly elections now being reduced to, from the BJP's point of view, near irrelevancy, and that's their biggest cause of trouble, and it's happening because of the regional parties. It's not happening because of Congress. So in some senses, you could argue that you are seeing a re-emergence of regional party dominance in the national narrative in a way that the 2014 election had just wiped out. And is this different to what role regional parties played, say, in 2009 or 2004?
So you're absolutely right. I think with every election, the competitive space between the regional parties and the national parties are going to be sort of recalibrated depending on the strength of the national parties. Some would argue that BJP, in its sort of overconfidence after winning the 2014, went on took it too far to sort of in the sense that they wanted not just to sort of eradicate or sort of finish all other parties in a system where it won't be a dominant.
No, but I'll tell you the difference for 2014 is that we went from a phase of nearly 20 years where, as Yamini Yadav famously argued that national elections are basically state elections, to having a dominant national figure who created a dominant national narrative that rendered regional state elections somewhat irrelevant, right? So suddenly you move very quickly from a long history of states and regional parties being central to shaping the narrative in New Delhi, to them completely disappearing from New Delhi's narrative. And now over the last 2 years carefully etching out and carving out a space for themselves and coming back to almost now renewed relevance. So in that renewed relevance, hasn't something changed?
So 2 points. I think that's a very interesting question you have asked. One, I think if you take this politics in the long frame from 1989, the rise of regional parties also simultaneously saw the rise of BJP.
Yes.
Right? So both things were happening at the same time. In fact, if you look at 1996 as the peak of regional parties' power, it was also the first time BJP emerges as the single largest party. And at that point also marks the first time Congress out of power for 7 years in a row.
Yeah.
So those 3 different trajectories met at that point in 1996, and I think in 2014, what you said, it looked as if they will become irrelevant because of the kind of majority BJP commanded and the kind of expansionist impulses it showed. But I think coming to 2019, the BJP realizes the limits to both. I think the limits to how far they can expand geographically, also in a short period of time. They might be able to do this in 5-7 years, but they realize that there are certain states, at least on the Arabian Sea coast, where it is hard for them to make an entry. They managed to, after 2014, managed to take Tripura as a new state. They might be sort of entering in a big way in Odisha and Bengal. So slowly they might acquire the status of a dominant party as Congress was in 50s and 60s. But at the moment they realize the limit of this expansion. And second, I think because they took it too far, many of these regional parties, especially in the north, realize that this is like a game of survival also. If they don't, so if you just look at Uttar Pradesh, the way BSP as a regional party was going down, their decline was in some ways aiding the BJP. And the Samajwadi Party realizes that if you allow BSP to go down further, it's not in your best interest. So they went and allied together. Similarly, in the case of Jharkhand, like there were lots of smaller players in Jharkhand, and many of them got together because they thought, like in India, as a political party, if you are very distant from position of power, the chances of your surviving in the rough and tumbles of electoral politics, because you cannot manage resources, is very low.
Yes.
So I think there is a renewed vigor, at least at the time of election, where the regional parties are trying to reclaim the space they had. Some of them will manage to get that space, others won't. So there will be winners and losers.
Sure. So Rahul, we've talked about this new party system in the context of real politics, in the context of how the power game is played out, and how efforts are being made increasingly by the regional parties to grab pieces of power back and realign themselves in response to the BJP. But I think an important element of this new party system is also how it's trying to shape a new. It's also how it's trying to shape the public discourse and how it's creating a new hegemony of ideas.
Yeah.
And I see, and I'm curious to hear your response to these things. I see in these elections, and of course these elections are a culmination of changes that have taken place over the better part of the last 4 or 5 years of the BJP in power in Delhi. I see two important characteristics. One, that there is a complete coarseness of political debate. Now, the obvious explanation is that the BJP knows it can't go to the polls on the back of the economy. And the Congress has been smart enough, to its credit, to pick up on that and try and reset the debate back to focusing on the economy. But in the way that it has chosen to articulate its position to the voters, we expected it to be communal, we expected it to be polarized, but there is a deep crassness to the way in which it is being pushed. And while the Election Commission has been caught winking, napping, and completely compromised, the fact that this has continued for a long stretch of time, to me, seems to suggest that there is almost a normalization of how political culture and political conduct in the public sphere is to take place. I mean, you could even argue that the chaukidar chor hai kind of language, it is in an attempt to appeal to and be a response, in fact, to that very coarseness that the BJP has sort of encouraged in public discourse. I wonder if we are going to enter a new phase of political culture and political conduct that is going to, in some senses, be divorced from substantive public debate and be much more engaged with this very sort of coarse public argumentation. So that does mean that there will be a closing off of space for public reason and argument on very critical issues. And to my mind, how parties have responded to the challenge of secularism is one example of precisely that. So we'll talk about secularism in a minute, but what is your response to that?
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think there is a new normal being set, and unfortunately for Indian democracy, that might be the base, and that's the future. Any rise of dominant party systems basically bring these elements. They are bad for institutions, they set up a new normal to the conduct of politics and the political culture. and especially the way BJP has been sort of approaching this election. In some ways, they have taken it too far on the right. Like the way they have been managing their campaign. If you remember, I was very young in 1991, 1996. I don't remember 91 election, but 96 I certainly do. I think when those elections were conducted in the wake of Ram Mandir mobilization, I think the 2019 campaign is far right even from those two elections.
Yeah.
And in some ways I would think because now BJP has a clear ideological project spearheaded by a leader who clearly sort of sees himself in that ideological mold. So dominant party systems have certain element. You have the party who leads that system has a clear ideological project. There is an organizational machinery which basically penetrates the civil society, what you were talking about. There is a charismatic leader. Because of that leadership, everything seems normal. And then there is, of course, the electoral dominance. Now, they may lose one or two elections, which happened with them between 2014 and 2019.
Yeah.
But the project continued to gain momentum within the civil society. And if you look at people like Pratap Mehta and Yogesh Yadav, they have been hinting at this problem, that the opposition at the moment is just looking for electoral alliances to defeat BJP. And defeating BJP will not solve the problem, because the problem actually is now to imagine an alternative way of conducting politics.
Exactly.
And some of the terms he basically used, I remember reading and listening to these two individuals, they basically point that most of these terms, secularism, nationalism, all of these have been basically appropriated.
No, I mean, exactly. I think the term secularism has been appropriated. It has been converted into a term that is basically to be debased. It's secular, libtard have become the ways in which we define secularism. But and I mean, to the Congress also, of course, in its conduct seems to be, in some senses, equating secularism with exactly what the BJP wants it to equate it with, which is this notion that secularism is about some form of minority appeasement, and is, I would argue, actually playing into their hands. And I have been surprised by how much they are, if you look at the Congress manifesto, for instance, which in many ways is we can quibble about whether or not we like the ideas in it, but the fact that it has attempted at least to construct a narrative is, I think, an important step in the right direction. And you'll see the way in which they articulate themselves, their narrative vis-a-vis the BJP is very much in terms of reclaiming the idea of India. This is an election that is critical for India, but they talk about love, they talk about they talk against hate, they talk against communalism. They do not talk about secularism. In fact, it seems like the attempt is to fight communalism without head-on taking on the challenge of secularism. And I think that India is actually ready for an important political and intellectual debate on secularism. Except that the shrinking of our public space and the coarseness of public debate is preventing any opportunity for having that conversation.
I completely agree with you, and that's the challenge. The challenge would become much bigger because there is an institutional assault which is happening. So it's not. I think we care we care too much about some institutions like, say, RBI, Supreme Court and other things. I think the assault or the changes which is happening at the university system. Now, this is not the first. So changes in politics changes our educational setup completely. And somewhere the intelligentsia, I think, failed in articulating how those changes in politics is affecting our educational setup, did not do anything about it. In 1980s, when the new party system was emerging in the wake of mobilization of lower caste, we saw some kind of assault on educational institutions at the state level, like Allahabad University, which was Oxbridge of East, Lucknow University, or say Patna University, or Jaipur University. All these were like very fine institutions, right? The politics at that moment tried to sort of like capture those institutions, and somewhere I think we failed to understand what it would do. We thought that okay, something has happened here, but like national institutions like JNU and DU and say Hyderabad University would not undergo a similar problem. But the new party system is basically going to assault those institutions, So the point I'm sort of trying to make that like the problem is much more that now we don't even have platforms where these debates can happen and where you can think about alternative modes of politics and alternative ways of mobilization. Much of the chatter is now restricted to like some segments of like even now it has become evidently clear that the media is completely polarized. So one way of seeing it is that they are on one side, but the other way is there is a clear demarcation where you can see which newspapers or news channels are on which side of the debate. And so if you're not left with platforms where two groups of people can come together and reimagine politics, I think we are at a like much deeper problem than we get.
Absolutely, but I would also say that I think that in as much as you talked about the university system and the attrition that has taken place there, and the erosion of spaces for conversations and debates that would actually be platforms for creating in new politics. But I think that we also have to hold our old politics to account for its complete failure and absolute lack of courage for taking on these new issues. And ultimately, even as the Congress has, in some senses, reawakened itself from 44 seats to now presenting itself as a viable challenger. I don't think it's in anybody's case that they are in any way going to be able to single-handedly topple the BJP, but they have certainly made them nervous, which is more than one could have said for the party when it in 2014. And it has tried to articulate a narrative. In fact, Rahul Gandhi, in some of his recent interviews, the flurry of interviews that he's given in the last few days, does say, we tried to do. We did a whole bunch of new things between 2004 2009. Then we tried to do the same things between 2009 2014. They didn't work. We are now articulating something new. But I scratch my head and struggle because that new seems to be very much in the safe zone of articulating some kind of new vision and welfare for the economy, sort of in bits and pieces. It's not necessarily large and in some senses shaking of the status quo or robust in that sense, but it is at least an attempt to try and build a new narrative. And every speech he gives, every interview he gives, he does turn it back to the issue of jobs, the agrarian crisis, and the current traumas that India's population is facing, but they are actively avoiding a serious conversation on these core, fundamental, basic principles of our constitution. And we are sort of ending up with a one-sided debate in that sense, where the appeal to the voter is vote for the opposition because that's the only way that you can put the brakes on the majoritarian agenda of the ruling party. But hey, I'm not going to say it out loud. So it's only about putting brakes. It's not actually about resetting and re-articulating.
Absolutely. I think on both things you pointed out. So at the moment, it seems like narrative control or challenging the narrative is only happening on, say, sound bites, right? If you want to sort of like make economic, so how has BJP succeeded in making majoritarianism and nationalism itself a narrative? They mobilize on these things, right? They will get their people on the street demanding the resignation of the government after 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. Even though government didn't do a really bad job there, right? But something like Pulwama happens or some other thing happen. Did we see opposition parties, like they're sort of scared in some ways to take them on national security platform,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
On the economic questions of say joblessness or agrarian distress, did we see Congress party or any other regional party mobilizing farmers? So I think narrative control cannot happen unless you also mobilize people on the ground where you seem like a credible alternative. And similarly on the question of majoritarianism, that if you sort of like run away from the question of how do you accommodate Muslims and Dalits into the body politic, this would seem like just a dressing down of like, few talking points, but it won't seem like a credible voice.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing, I don't know whether the survey data that's indicating a sort of apathy among the marginalized sections of the society. If that continues to happen, if they continue not to turn out to vote, it is going to hurt parties which are dependent on their votes.
Absolutely. So just to close before we get into questions and answers, is I think what we've discussed today, Rahul and I, this isn't we don't really know what a wave is. But what we do know is, in some senses, this is a normal election, an election that has entrenched, I think, the BJP as the new dominant party in Indian politics. There is some degree of adjustment that we will see. BJP will certainly lose seats in some parts, particularly Uttar Pradesh. It may likely gain a few in Odisha and West Bengal. The Congress will gain significantly if we take 44 as its base, but not significantly enough to pose itself once again as a dominant party that is shaping the political discourse. And in that, we are also likely to see the continuation of this project of new hegemony of ideas that are challenging some of the more fundamental basic constitutional principles that this country was founded on. Most importantly, the big question of secularism. And we are likely to see a continued corrosive public discourse and political culture in the near future. So we have one important question actually, Rahul, which I will throw to you, which is, how would you quantify the silent voter? I think over the last few days, we've seen a lot of talk about the silent voter that is likely to shape the outcomes of on May 23rd. We have also heard a lot about this culture of fear that is preventing the voter from articulating their true positions and the choices they are making because of the overall environment in which this election is taking place. What's your view?
So this is an important question, and you're absolutely right. Most people in the social media space are using this term that this is not a wave election, and either this is a wave election or the silent voter is going to sort of upset the apple cart.
I feel like the silent voter is an easy way of justifying when my predictions are all wrong. There was a silent voter.
Yeah, and in some ways this term silent voter, like the term wave, has acquired certain mythical connotation, and we actually don't know who the silent voter is. So this term was perhaps used in 60s and 70s and 80s when you had a dominant party. And you had a network of like operators on the ground. We heard stories of booth capturing and other things. So despite one single party, the Congress party, having controlled all positions of elected power, still used to lose election, right? And the term basically came from that era, that there are silent voters who don't say anything when you sort of go and ask, but basically they vote against the government on the polling day. Then this silent voter started getting used in the context of BSP. BSP voters, they don't speak much, but they basically go and vote for the BSP in minority. I think from like this term actually is now not like, perhaps it's relevant after, like in the current election, but in last 4 or 5 elections, this term had no meaning because polls were estimating BSP's vote shares correctly.
Yeah.
In that sense, like if it was about, so most regional they were not getting underestimated in polls, and you could clearly see that there was an articulation from voters who vote for either BSP or say Lalu Prasad Yadav, RJD or other parties. Of course, anyone who goes on the field clearly sees that BJP supporters are much more vocal. Like, even before you ask them who you are voting for, they will say
they will make the presence clear.
And they will make lots of noise about why they are voting for BJP and that party. So, and it's also a function of, in some ways, the caste, class, and gender function of the society, right? Like,
and that the BJP is in power.
Exactly.
Automatically more important.
Now, I think this term is again being used in the context that like people are going on the ground, they meet basically very articulate BJP supporters, but then there is another group of voters who don't know what to say, and they might upturn the election. So one, it's hard to quantify, as the person who asked this question is correct on that front, and I think the more worrying phenomena for me is, are these voters the same voters who are not even speaking and may or not even turn out? Something which I talked about a couple of days ago, that the polls basically show that a segment among the marginalized sections feel apathetic towards politics and may not turn out. So in that sense, it wouldn't be silent voters voting and changing the election outcome, it would be silent voters not turning out.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Rahul. This was a fun conversation, and look forward. We have now, I think, 10 more days or 2 weeks before we know what the outcome is on May 23rd. So watch this space. We'll have more such conversations over the next 2 weeks. And hopefully very soon on we will know what the new normal for India is going to look like. Thank you.